Why did the range go silent when she answered? The question had been tossed like a coin meant to amuse. A joke, really. A harmless little flex from a lieutenant who had never missed an opportunity to remind people who stood above whom. Olivia Daniels was supposed to smile, shrug, maybe blush. She was supposed to be background noise. Someone who carried crates, logged deliveries, disappeared. Instead, she answered with numbers. Not estimates, not rounded figures, exact distances, wind speed, temperature differential, ammunition grain, time of flight. The laughter died first, then the casual chatter, then the certainty. Olivia didn't raise her voice. She didn't straighten her posture or puff her chest. She just spoke the truth the way she always had, precise, economical, unadorned. The way her father taught her. And for the first time in her life, invisibility cracked. She felt it immediately, the weight of attention pressing in from all directions, eyes narrowing, calculations forming, curiosity sharpening into something less friendly. She had spent decades learning how to disappear on military bases, when to step aside, when to lower her gaze, when to move quickly and quietly so officers wouldn't even remember seeing her. That skill deserted her now. The general's voice cut through the tension like a blade, calm, measured, dangerous in its restraint. Prove it. There it was, the line she could never step back across. As Olivia followed them to the firing line, the familiar smell of oil and dust settled her nerves. Not the crowd, not the rank, not the quiet hostility blooming behind polite expressions. The rifle did that. The ritual, the physics, the truth that a bullet doesn't care who you are. She adjusted a rifle that wasn't hers, a scope set for another shooter's eye, a trigger with a slightly heavier pull than she preferred. None of it mattered. Fundamentals always mattered more than comfort. Her father used to say that the rifle was only a translator. It spoke the language the shooter already knew. She breathed, felt the wind on her cheek, watched the grass far downrange ripple unevenly, calculated, recalculated, waited for her heartbeat to slow. When she fired, she didn't look away. The first impact was high, acceptable, informative. She adjusted without urgency, no rush, no panic, only correction. The second round struck center mass. The third hit the head. She stood, cleared the rifle, and stepped back as if she'd just finished any ordinary task. As if she hadn't just rewritten how half the officers on that range would remember her forever. She didn't smile. Pride came later, much later. Right now there was only the ache in her chest, the familiar one, the ache that came whenever her father should have been there to see it. And when the general said her name again, carefully this time, she knew the past was no longer content to stay buried. What did it mean when excellence made you visible to the same system that erased your father? Olivia didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the small house, the base assigned to civilian employees, and stared at the ceiling fan as it clicked softly with each rotation. Her mother slept in the other room, unaware that the fragile balance they'd maintained for 11 years had shifted. In the quiet, memories surfaced uninvited. Her father teaching her to read mirage patterns at dawn, explaining how heat bent light and how patience mattered more than strength, telling her that good shooters weren't aggressive, they were honest, honest with math, honest with themselves. The knock on the door all those years ago had taken more than a man. It had taken certainty. Now certainty was clawing its way back. The meeting with the general felt less like recognition and more like an autopsy of her life. Questions layered with subtext. Why aren't you serving? Why are you here? Why did no one know? She answered truthfully, about the medical disqualifications, about caring for her mother, about choosing survival over visibility. What she didn't say was how many times she'd stood on ranges under a false name just to feel close to her father again. How anonymity had been a shield, not a lie. When they mentioned her father's files being purged, something cold settled in her stomach. Records don't vanish by accident. Captain Simmons noticed. Intelligence officers always did. She watched Olivia not like an officer evaluating a subordinate, but like a woman recognizing another woman standing at the edge of something dangerous. And when Simmons quietly suggested that her father's death deserved a second look, Olivia felt something unfamiliar rise inside her. Hope scared her more than anger ever had. By the time she left the building, word had already spread. Respect in some corners, resentment in others, and from Lieutenant Lockwood something sharper, something personal. Threats didn't come as shouted warnings. They came as polite implications, housing contracts, employment reviews, smiles that never reached the eyes. By evening, the letter arrived. Her mother's job under review. The message was clear. Olivia stared at the paper, hands steady, heart anything but. The system had noticed her, and it had responded exactly the way her mother always feared it would. But fear had lost its power the moment Olivia decided she would no longer be small. What kind of truth could get a man killed and a daughter silenced? The USB drive felt heavier than it should have. Olivia held it like a relic, fingers trembling despite her effort to remain calm. When the video began playing and her father's face filled the screen, she forgot how to breathe. He looked tired, focused, older than she remembered. And afraid. He spoke carefully like a man who knew words might outlive him. He documented names, contracts, patterns, motive. He explained how defective optics had passed inspection, how soldiers were training with equipment that would fail them when it mattered most. And then he said it. If something happens to me. Olivia felt something fracture inside her, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible break, grief reshaped into purpose. This wasn't paranoia, this wasn't coincidence. This was a warning that came true. Captain Simmons listened without interrupting when Olivia brought the evidence forward. No theatrics, no promises, just a tightening jaw and a methodical mind at work. The competition became more than validation. It became strategy. Visibility, Simmons explained, could be armor. If Olivia stepped into the light publicly, under her real name, then anything that happened to her wouldn't vanish into silence the way her father's death had. The idea terrified her, but backing down terrified her more. The night before the competition, Olivia cleaned her rifle with the same care her father once had, each part inspected, each motion familiar, ritual calming her racing thoughts. She wasn't chasing revenge. She was chasing truth. And truth, she knew, required witnesses. Could skill alone protect her when power felt threatened? The range was crowded. Media, observers, retired shooters, officers who pretended not to stare. Olivia felt every eye track her as she took her position. No pseudonym now, no hiding, just her name printed cleanly on the roster. She reminded herself to breathe. The distances were long but not extreme, the conditions imperfect, crosswinds shifting just enough to punish complacency. Good. Perfection made people suspicious. Reality was messier. She shot with discipline, no wasted motion, no unnecessary flair. Hits spoke louder than confidence ever could. By the final stage, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The tone had changed. Skepticism gave way to something closer to reverence. When she finished, she didn't celebrate. She simply stepped away from the rifle and let the results stand. That night the story broke wider than she expected. Not sensationalized, just factual. A civilian woman with extraordinary precision, a lineage, a question mark surrounding a long-closed case. The system noticed again. This time it hesitated. The pressure intensified. Subtle intimidation, anonymous warnings, a car that followed her once, then never again. But so did the support. Former soldiers came forward, old trainees of her father, Equipment logs surfaced. Witnesses remembered things they'd been told to forget. Truth is patient. It waits until enough people are ready to carry it. What does justice look like when it finally arrives quietly? There was no dramatic arrest, no televised apology. There was paperwork, reviews, reopened cases. Careers ended not with handcuffs but with resignations and silence. The official finding never used the word murder, but it acknowledged negligence, corruption, deliberate suppression of evidence. And sometimes, that is as close as systems ever get to saying sorry. Olivia stood alone at the range one early morning months later. No audience, no rank, just the wind and the target. She took a single shot. It landed clean. She smiled then, just a little. Not because she'd won, but because she'd endured. Her mother slept easier now. The house no longer felt like borrowed ground, and her father's name was spoken again, not in whispers but with respect. Olivia knew the world hadn't changed completely, but something had shifted, and sometimes that's enough. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't need permission. Sometimes dignity simply acts and lets the truth catch up. Why did the silence after the shot feel heavier than the sound itself? Olivia felt it before anyone spoke, the pressure of attention tightening around her like a held breath. Not applause, not disbelief, something sharper, assessment. The kind that peeled past the surface in search for leverage. She stood where she was, hands loose at her sides, eyes forward as if still invisible. Habit. Muscle memory from a lifetime of being overlooked. The steel target downrange rocked once more, then settled. The echo faded into the trees. Wind moved again, indifferent. General Sheffield didn't speak right away. He studied her the way experienced commanders studied terrain, quietly, carefully, nodding what others missed. Olivia had seen that look before, usually from men who understood that skill changed equations. Lieutenant Lockwood broke first. He laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Nice shooting," he said, too fast. "At 1,000 meters, from a bench, with a military-grade rifle already zeroed." It was a rescue attempt, a way to shrink what had just happened. Master Sergeant Burton didn't let it land. "That rifle wasn't zeroed for her," he said calmly, and she corrected wind on the fly. "That last shot, head zone, most of my students don't attempt that on their best day." Lockwood's jaw tightened. Olivia kept her gaze neutral. She didn't want to escalate. She wanted to leave, go back to the truck, finish the delivery, return to the safe geometry of routine. But she knew that geometry no longer existed. General Sheffield finally spoke. "Miss Daniels, walk with me." It wasn't a request. They moved away from the cluster of officers, toward the edge of the range where the noise softened and the ground sloped gently down. Olivia's heartbeat picked up, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being addressed as someone who mattered. "You understand," the general said, eyes still forward, "that what you demonstrated raises questions." "Yes, sir." "About your background." "Yes, sir." "And about why no one here knew." Olivia hesitated, not because she lacked answers, but because every answer carried weight. "I didn't advertise it, sir." Sheffield nodded slightly. "No, you didn't." They stopped. He turned to face her fully now. People who don't advertise their capabilities usually learn the cost of being seen. The words landed closer to the truth than Olivia liked. She swallowed. "My father taught me to shoot. He worked here. You probably knew him." Sheffield's brow creased faintly. "Daniels," he murmured. "Yes, I remember the name, skilled instructor, died during a training incident." Olivia felt the old ache flare, sharp and familiar. "That's what the report says." The general studied her again, longer this time. "You don't sound convinced." "I've had 11 years to think about it, sir." He didn't press. Instead, he nodded once. "I want you in my office this afternoon, 2 o'clock." She didn't ask why, she just answered, "Yes, sir." As he walked away, Olivia felt the eyes return, some curious, some impressed, some hostile. She packed up quietly, logged the delivery, and left without looking back. The drive home felt unreal. The base roads she knew so well seemed altered, as if the landscape itself had shifted slightly off-center. She parked beside her mother's car and sat for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Visibility, she thought, this is what it costs. Inside the house, the familiar smell of cleaning supplies and old coffee grounded her. Deborah wasn't home yet. Olivia used the quiet to change clothes, wash her hands, and steady herself. At 13:58, she was back in the truck. Building 12 loomed like every administrative building she'd ever seen, functional, impersonal, designed to process people into categories. Olivia had spent her life adjacent to these spaces, never inside them as the reason for a meeting. The receptionist checked her ID twice. Conference Room B was smaller than she expected. General Sheffield sat at the head of the table. Captain Simmons stood near a whiteboard, tablet in hand. Master Sergeant Burton leaned against the wall, arms crossed. No Lockwood. That omission told Olivia more than his presence would have. "Sit," Sheffield said. She did. "What you demonstrated this morning," the general began, "was not beginner's luck. It was not improvisation. It was trained, disciplined, repeatable skill." Olivia nodded once. "Yes, sir." "Your father trained special operations units. He was considered one of the best civilian instructors we had." Sheffield paused. "After his death, his records are sparse." Captain Simmons spoke next, unusually sparse. Olivia felt a chill. Sparse how? Missing evaluations, missing methodology documentation, portions of his contract file purged less than a year after his death. Burton shifted. "That doesn't happen by accident." Silence stretched. Sheffield folded his hands. "Miss Daniels, I'm going to ask you something directly, and you can refuse to answer." Olivia met his eyes. "All right. Did your father ever express concerns about his safety?" The question hit harder than she expected. She saw her father's face in her mind, the way he'd checked the locks twice, the way his voice had lowered near the end. "Yes," she said quietly. "He did." Simmons' eyes sharpened. "Did he say why?" "He said he'd found something he wasn't supposed to," Olivia replied. "Something involving equipment, procurement." The room went very still. Sheffield exhaled slowly. "That aligns with other information." "Sir," Olivia said carefully, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because you've made yourself relevant," he replied, "and because someone already tried to remind you of the consequences." He slid a document across the table. It was a notice of employment review. Her mother's name at the top. Olivia felt heat rise in her chest. "This came this morning." "Yes," Sheffield said, "it shouldn't have." Captain Simmons added, "It was initiated without proper cause." Olivia clenched her jaw. Anger threatened to spill over, but she forced it down. "So this is retaliation." "It appears to be pressure," Sheffield corrected, "applied clumsily." Burton snorted softly. Sheffield leaned forward. "Miss Daniels, you are at a crossroads. You can step back now. Decline further involvement. I can make this go away." Olivia understood what he meant. Safety through silence. Invisibility restored. "And if I do?" she asked. "Then things get complicated." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she thought of her father's voice. Calm, patient, unyielding. "I've lived invisible for 11 years," she said. "It didn't protect him, and it didn't protect us." Sheffield studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Very well." Captain Simmons spoke again. "There's a regional precision competition in 3 weeks, military and civilian, media coverage." Olivia frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Because visibility," Simmons said, "cuts both ways." Burton added, "If you compete publicly under your real name, it becomes harder for anyone to quietly apply pressure." Olivia understood. Witnesses, documentation, light. "And if I lose?" she asked. Simmons met her gaze. "You won't." That night, Olivia told her mother everything. Deborah listened without interrupting, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When Olivia finished, the silence stretched until it became unbearable. "They're already threatening my job," Deborah said quietly. "You know what that means." "I know," Olivia replied, "but backing down won't stop it." Deborah looked up then, fear and pride tangled together. "Your father used to say the same thing." Olivia reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "He taught me to stand my ground." Deborah closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had changed. "Then we do this together." Later, alone in her room, Olivia cleaned her rifle slowly, each motion deliberate, familiar, grounding. She wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing truth. And for the first time since her father died, that felt possible. Sometimes courage doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it's just the decision not to step back when the pressure comes. Why did the threat feel more precise than the praise ever had? Olivia noticed it the next morning in small, unsettling ways. The way the neighbor across the gravel lot looked away too quickly. The way the guard at the checkpoint scanned her ID a second longer than necessary. The way her mother's supervisor suddenly needed updated paperwork. None of it was overt. None of it could be proven, but it was coordinated enough to feel intentional. Pressure didn't arrive as violence. It arrived as inconvenience, as uncertainty, as reminders of how fragile stability really was. She spent the morning at the range anyway. The civilian range outside Fort Harrison was quieter than the base facilities, but Olivia preferred it that way. No ranks, no hierarchy, just shooters and wind and distance. She signed in under her real name now. That alone made her pulse quicken. She took her time setting up, checked the rifle twice, watched the flags downrange, let the rhythm return. Shooting had always been her refuge, but now it carried weight beyond itself. Every shot felt like a statement whether she wanted it to or not. She performed well, not perfectly but honestly. A few corrections, a few adjustments, consistency over spectacle. When she packed up, an older man approached her. Civilian, weathered hands, quiet eyes. "You're Daniel's kid," he said, not asking. Olivia stiffened. "Yes." He nodded. "Your father taught me wind calls at Bennying. Best teacher I ever had." He hesitated. "He talked about you." That stopped her. "What did he say?" "That you listened," the man replied. "Most people don't." He walked away before she could respond, leaving behind a warmth that hurt almost as much as it healed. At home, Captain Simmons called. "I need you to be careful," she said without preamble. "We've flagged irregular access attempts on base systems. Someone's digging." "Digging for what?" Olivia asked. "For you, for your father, for leverage." Olivia leaned against the counter, staring at the wall. "And the competition?" "It's going ahead," Simmons said, "but there's something else." The pause stretched. "Your father's case file," Simmons continued. "Parts of it weren't just purged, they were replaced." Olivia closed her eyes. Replaced with what? With cleaner versions, simplified narratives, missing inconsistencies. "That's not an accident," Olivia said. "No," Simmons agreed. "That's maintenance." That night, Olivia dreamed of winds she couldn't read, of shots that never landed, of her father standing just out of reach, trying to say something she couldn't hear. She woke before dawn, heart racing, and went for a run to burn the unease out of her system. The air was cold, sharp, honest. It reminded her that her body still belonged to her, even if the situation didn't. 2 days later, the rifle was sabotaged. It happened quietly. No alarms, no broken locks, just subtle damage meant to hurt, not announce. Sand in the action, a scratched chamber, a scope ring loosened just enough to throw alignment under recoil. Master Sergeant Burton found it before Olivia could fire. "This wasn't vandalism," he said, voice low. "This was intent." Captain Simmons photographed everything, logged times, pulled access records. The list of people who could have entered the armory was short. Too short. "This is escalation," Simmons said later, standing with Olivia beside the truck. "They're warning you." Olivia's hands shook, not with fear but with anger. "They could have killed me." "Yes," Simmons replied evenly, "which means you're closer than they want you to be." The competition became non-negotiable after that. Media interest grew, human interest angles, a woman who outshot soldiers, a legacy, a question mark. Olivia hated the attention, but she understood the shield it created. At night, she and her mother talked more openly than they had in years, about her father's habits, his last weeks, his unease. Deborah admitted things she'd kept buried, about late-night calls, about a USB drive she'd hidden and forgotten. They dug it out together from beneath the house. The drive still worked. What it contained changed everything. Photos, test results, emails, a video message recorded days before her father's death, his face serious, his voice steady. "If something happens to me," he said, "this is why." Olivia watched it in silence, her chest tight, tears slipping down her face without sound. He'd known, he'd been afraid, and he'd chosen integrity anyway. Simmons took the evidence seriously, so did the general. The pattern was undeniable now: fraud, suppression, motive. Still, truth moved slowly. Threats didn't. Lieutenant Lockwood confronted Olivia in a hallway days later, his tone smooth, his eyes sharp. He mentioned her mother's housing, her claims, Pentagon connections, consequences. Olivia didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten back. She just said, "I'm not lying." And for the first time, Lockwood looked uncertain. The night before the competition, Olivia sat alone with her rifle laid out in front of her. Clean, inspected, trusted. She thought about the cost of truth, how it demanded payment up front with no guarantee of return, how courage didn't feel heroic, it felt exhausting. She wasn't fearless. She was tired. But tired didn't mean finished. She packed her gear carefully, set her alarm, and lay down knowing that tomorrow she wouldn't just be shooting for accuracy. She'd be shooting for her name, for her father's legacy, for the right to exist in the open without apology. Sometimes resilience isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up again, even when someone has tried to break your tools and your spirit. Why did the morning feel like it was waiting for her to fail? Olivia sensed it the moment she stepped onto the competition grounds. Not hostility, something colder. Expectation. As if the air itself had decided how the day should end, and her job was to either confirm it or disrupt it. The range stretched wide and open under a pale sky, wind already restless, teasing the flags like a warning. Cameras were there. Not many, but enough. A few local outlets. One national correspondent hovering near the check-in desk, pretending to review notes while clearly watching her. She signed in, her name printed clean and unhidden. Daniels Olivia. No aliases left. Competitors glanced over with curiosity and thinly veiled doubt. Some nodded politely. Others didn't bother. A few stared too long. She recognized the look, people trying to reconcile skill with someone they had already placed in a smaller box. She kept moving. Captain Simmons found her near the equipment racks. Dressed in civilian clothes now, she looked less like an intelligence officer and more like a coach. Her voice was steady, but her eyes stayed alert. "We've had unusual credential checks this morning," Simmons said quietly. "Nothing illegal, just interest." Olivia exhaled slowly. Lockwood. Possibly others. Any direct interference? Not yet. yet hung heavy between them. Master Sergeant Burton clapped Olivia lightly on the shoulder. "Conditions are tricky," he said. "Winds are shifting between the 600 and 900 markers. Don't chase it." "I won't," Olivia replied. She believed herself. The first stage began. Long-range prone, steel targets, known distances, unknown wind, a test of fundamentals, not ego. Olivia settled in. Let the noise fall away. The crowd blurred. The cameras ceased to exist. There was only the rifle, the data, and the space between muzzle and target. Her first shot rang out clean. Impact. A ripple of sound followed, murmurs, not cheers. She ignored it. Second shot, correction, impact. Third, impact again. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. She found the rhythm she'd trained for her entire life, the one her father used to call the quiet place, where doubt had no oxygen. When the stage ended, her score sat near the top. Not dominant, but undeniable. Between stages, she felt the pressure build. A competitor muttered something about favors. Another joked too loudly about beginner's luck. Olivia didn't respond. She drank water, checked her dope, stayed inside herself. The next stage introduced stress shooting. Timers, physical exertion before firing, elevated heart rate. This was where precision often collapsed. She welcomed it. Pain and fatigue were honest. They stripped away pretense. She ran hard, lungs burning, legs heavy, then dropped into position. The reticle danced. She waited, counted breaths, let the world slow to meet her pace. She fired. The hit came half a second later. And then again. And again. When she stood, she felt something loosen inside her chest. Not pride, relief, proof that pressure hadn't taken her from herself. By midday, she was leading. Not by much, enough to matter. That's when the protest came. A challenge lodged by a competitor's team, questioning her equipment, her eligibility, her background. The officials paused the event. Olivia stood to the side as her rifle was inspected. Again, thoroughly, serial numbers, optics, ammunition, everything within regulation. She waited without protest, without explanation. Because truth didn't rush. The challenge failed. Quiet applause followed, not loud but sincere, from people who understood what it meant to be questioned publicly and cleared cleanly. Lockwood arrived late in the afternoon, civilian clothes, too polished, too interested. He watched her shoot the final stage. This one was long, extreme distance, mirage heavy, wind inconsistent, the kind of shot that punished arrogance. Olivia lay prone for a long time before firing, too long for spectators. Some shifted uncomfortably. A cameraman nearly whispered something before stopping himself. She waited. She remembered her father's voice. Don't force the shot, let it arrive. When it did, she took it. The bullet flew true. Impact echoed across the range. Silence followed. Then a slow building reaction, not celebration, recognition. She didn't look at Lockwood. She didn't need to. When the scores were finalized, Olivia Daniels stood at the top. Not by accident, not by favoritism. By merit. The interviews came after, short, careful. She spoke about training, about discipline, about her father without bitterness. When asked about pressure, she paused. Pressure shows you what you're holding onto, she said. I held onto my fundamentals. That night, as the sun dropped low and the range emptied, Captain Simmons joined her near the parking lot. This changes things, Simmons said. Yes, Olivia replied, it does. For you, Simmons continued, and for them. Olivia leaned against her truck, exhaustion finally seeping in. I didn't do this to fight anyone. I know, Simmons said. You did it so the truth couldn't be ignored. Olivia thought of her father, of the quiet pride he'd never voiced, Of the line he'd drawn when walking away would have been easier. She looked back at the range one last time before leaving. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't loud. They happen in stillness, under scrutiny, where the only weapon you're allowed to use is who you really are. Why did victory feel less like an ending and more like an invitation to danger? Olivia understood it the moment she left the range. The attention hadn't lifted, it had sharpened. Winning hadn't closed the story, it had opened it wider. Her name was no longer a curiosity, it was a thread people wanted to pull. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. She noticed the sedan behind her, early, gray, unremarkable, careful not to be obvious. It stayed back, matched her turns, then disappeared just before her neighborhood. A reminder, nothing more, nothing less. At home, her mother hugged her tightly, pride trembling just beneath worry. They didn't talk much over dinner. Both sensed the fragile calm between storms. The call came after dark. Captain Simmons didn't bother with pleasantries. "We confirmed it," she said. "Your father's equipment findings were valid, not just flawed optics, deliberate downgrades, cheaper components rerouted through shell vendors. Someone made a lot of money, and soldiers paid the risk." Olivia closed her eyes. So it was real. "It was real," Simmons confirmed, "and your father refused to sign off." Silence stretched between them. "That puts a target on anyone who revives the issue," Simmons continued, "including you." Olivia felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, responsibility. What happens now? "Now," Simmons said, "it moves beyond internal review, external oversight, quietly at first." "And Lockwood?" "A player," Simmons replied. "Not the only one, but loud enough to be useful to others." The next days blurred together, meetings held behind closed doors, statements carefully worded. Olivia was asked to recount memories she'd never wanted to revisit, dates, conversations, her father's moods near the end. Each recollection cost her something. Sleep became shallow. She woke often, listening for sounds that weren't there. Her rifle stayed close, not as a weapon but as an anchor, something familiar in a world shifting under her feet. The pressure on her mother intensified. Inspections, paperwork delays, subtle suggestions that early retirement might be less stressful. Deborah held her ground, but Olivia saw the toll it took, the lines deepening around her eyes, the way her hands shook when she thought Olivia wasn't looking. Guilt crept in, quiet, persistent. One evening, Olivia found her mother sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at an old photograph. Her father at the range, smiling softly, sun in his eyes. "He knew this might happen," Deborah said without looking up. "Didn't he?" Olivia sat across from her. "I think he hoped it wouldn't, but he prepared anyway." Deborah nodded. "He always said truth doesn't rush. It waits until someone is willing to stand still long enough for it to catch them." That night, Olivia decided something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She would finish this. Not just for her father, for the soldiers who never knew their equipment had been compromised, for the quiet people who'd been told to look away. The break came unexpectedly. An email, anonymous, short. "I trained under your father, I know what he found. They threatened my family, I can't stay silent anymore." Attached was a time and a place. Captain Simmons advised caution. This could be a trap. "I know," Olivia replied, "but it could also be the truth." They didn't send Olivia alone. The meeting happened in a public park mid-morning, joggers, dog walkers, ordinary life as cover. The man who approached looked older than Olivia expected, thinner, like someone who'd been carrying a weight too long. He didn't sit. "They changed the tolerances," he said quietly. "Just enough. Failures wouldn't show up in training, only under stress." Olivia listened, asked questions, let him speak. He handed over documents, originals, unaltered, signed. "This cost your father his life," the man said, voice breaking. "I'm sorry it took me this long." When he left, Olivia sat on the bench for a long time, staring at the space he'd occupied. The evidence shifted everything. Within days, formal investigations were announced, carefully, bureaucratically. Names weren't mentioned publicly, but inside the system, panic rippled. Lockwood requested a meeting. Olivia agreed on her terms. They met in a glass-walled office, visibility absolute. Lockwood smiled the way men do when they think charm can still solve things. "You've stirred up a lot," he said lightly. "I didn't stir anything," Olivia replied. "I uncovered it." He leaned back. "You don't understand how this works." She met his gaze. "I understand exactly how it works. That's why it's ending." For the first time, his smile faltered. The consequences didn't come fast. They never did. But they came. Reassignments, quiet removals, careers stalled indefinitely. Lockwood disappeared from the base within a month, transferred officially, isolated unofficially. The final report took longer. When it was released, it didn't mention Olivia by name. But it restored her father's. Negligence acknowledged, records corrected, responsibility distributed just enough to satisfy justice without shaking the foundation. Olivia read the document alone. She didn't cry. Some victories don't bring relief, they bring closure, a quieter, heavier thing. Weeks later, she returned to the range. Alone, early morning, the same place where it had all begun. She set up a single target. One shot. Clean. She lowered the rifle and let the silence settle. Her phone buzzed, a message from Captain Simmons. "You did something rare," it read. "You told the truth and stayed human." Olivia smiled faintly. Strength, she realized, wasn't about endurance alone. It was about knowing when not to let go, even when the cost came due. Why did the quiet feel earned only after everything else was stripped away? Olivia stood at the edge of the range before sunrise, the world washed in pale gray. No flags moved yet. No voices carried. The earth hadn't decided which way the wind would lean. It felt like a pause granted by something larger than consequence or victory, a moment where nothing asked anything of her. She hadn't come to shoot. She'd come to stand. The investigation was over now. Not loudly, not cleanly, but completely enough. Contracts rewritten. Oversight committees formed. Training standards restored. Her father's name cleared and quietly honored in a way the system preferred, without ceremony, without spectacle. That suited her. She thought about how close she'd come to walking away, how easy it would have been to remain unseen, how tempting it still was, some days, to trade purpose for peace. But peace, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the presence of alignment. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her mother, already at work, already steady again. "Proud of you, your father would be too." Olivia closed her eyes and breathed it in. Not the praise, the relief beneath it. She moved slowly, methodically, the way her father had taught her, laid out the rifle, checked the chamber, adjusted the sling, not because she needed to, but because ritual mattered, because some habits weren't about function. They were about remembrance. She loaded a single round. Prone felt natural, familiar, the ground cool against her elbows. She scanned the distance not for targets but for understanding. The mirage was light today, wind minimal, a forgiving morning. She didn't take the shot. Instead, she lay there and remembered. The nights her father came home quiet, the way he'd cleaned his gear even when he hadn't fired, the patience he'd shown her when she missed, not correcting, just waiting until she asked. He hadn't taught her to be exceptional. He taught her to be honest. That, she realized, was what had unsettled people most. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn. Captain Simmons stopped a respectful distance away. "I thought I'd find you here." Olivia smiled faintly. It seemed right. They stood together in the stillness. No rank between them now. Just two women who had navigated a system without becoming what it tried to make of them. They offered you a position, Simmons said. Advisory, training, development, you'd be good at it. Olivia considered that, teaching, guiding, standing at the edge instead of the center. Maybe, she said, in time. And until then, I think I'll rest, Olivia replied, and then I'll decide. Simmons nodded. She understood. That might be the bravest choice yet. When Simmons left, Olivia finally rose. She stood, brushed dirt from her sleeves, and looked once more across the range. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who kept her head down, who believed silence was safety. That girl had survived because she had to. This woman stood because she chose to. Olivia packed up slowly. No rush, no urgency pulling her forward anymore. As she walked back to her truck, the sun crested the horizon, light spilling across the land. Ordinary, beautiful, earned. She paused, hand on the door, and allowed herself one last thought of her father, not as a loss but as a presence. A steady one, quiet, enduring. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes it comes in the form of clarity. In knowing that you didn't look away. That you didn't shrink when it mattered. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts and lets the truth find its own voice.